names. Thank you. So you can put your names and your countries in the chat. So I'm Brussels based. So as an introduction of this session, I will start with an incredible fact that in 2022, so this year, it is expected that over 41 million persons with disability will be in need of humanitarian assistance affected by a humanitarian emergency. As set out in the call, so this event is organized by the Disability Reference Group to discuss action needed to promote the rights of persons with disability affected by humanitarian emergencies. So as set out in the call that this group prepared, Kristen will kindly post the link to this call to action in the chat box. This will require commitment by humanitarian and development actors to ensure that people with disability affected by humanitarian emergencies are no longer left behind and really included in all the actions. So this event will bring in perspectives from the global level, as well from persons with disability themselves and humanitarian actors in and from Afghanistan in order to demonstrate how this Global Disability Summit can make a difference at all levels. So our first speaker is Her Excellency Ambassador Tina Schmidt. She's a permanent representative of Norway at the United Nations in Geneva. Can you please tell us a little bit from your governmental perspective how the Global Disability Summit in 2018 drove changes for persons with disabilities affected by humanitarian emergencies, and what progress have we made in the past 4 years so that we now have an opportunity to build further on? Please, Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nadia, and good morning and good afternoon to all. I'm very pleased to participate at this side event, focusing exactly on disability inclusion in humanitarian context. So let me start with a few words about what Norway hopes to achieve in the course of the second Global Disability Summit, and then touch upon what has been achieved since the first summit in London 4 years ago. Let me assure you one thing, we have very high ambitions for the Oslo summit. Together with our co-host Ghana and the International Disability Alliance, Norway seeks new and more specific commitments to accelerate inclusive development through access, engagement, and equality. Persons living with disabilities are too often viewed as a group in need of assistance instead of as participants in society. So we expect that the commitments at the summit will bring about genuine change for persons with disabilities. We also expect these commitments to contribute to the enhancement of the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities on country level. This is an important point for us. We think that the success will depend on close collaboration with all partners, among them states, multilateral organizations, and civil society organizations. And in the case of Norway, we will also launch a new strategy on disability inclusive development at this summit. And this strategy will contain our international commitments. So in London, health was not on the agenda at the summit, and therefore not mentioned in the London Summit Charter for Change. So we are therefore pleased that inclusive health is one of the topics being addressed during the Oslo summit. We know that persons with disabilities in low and middle income countries often experience significant barriers to access healthcare. And persons with disabilities also face significant inequities in areas which determine health, such as poverty, discrimination, violence, and social exclusion. So we know that persons with disabilities in humanitarian situations have been particularly affected by COVID-19. And this side event that we participate in now will enable us to focus on how we can include persons with disabilities in all humanitarian activities and how we can improve cooperation between humanitarian agencies and organizations of persons with disabilities. So what progress have we made in the past 4 years that we know have an opportunity to build on? The first Disability Summit in 2018 was important for bringing increased attention to the situation of persons with disabilities in humanitarian emergencies, building on the momentum generated through the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016. For example, commitments were made for funding disability-inclusive humanitarian response in some of the world's most complex emergencies. Commitments were also made for shifting the way that humanitarian action is delivered to ensure that persons with disabilities are reached with assistance and can participate as actors in the response. By having today's event focus on one particular country context, Afghanistan, we have an opportunity to explore how impact is made at country level in the lives of those most affected by humanitarian emergencies. In 2018, almost 2/3 of the humanitarian commitments made were targeted at the global level, including setting global standards and guidelines for disability inclusion in humanitarian action. And in 2022, we are in a position to look beyond global standards to translate policy into action. For example, to ensure that humanitarian actors have the practical knowledge, the skills, and access to resources to deliver an inclusive response and to increase learning on what works in diverse emergency contexts. So since the last summit, we have seen an emerging focus on the humanitarian development nexus, which is a lot more in discussion now. And this reflects the complex and protracted nature of humanitarian emergencies today and the need to focus on building resilience and sustainable solutions. So I look very much forward to learning more about the way forward from the many experienced participants that we have here today and that will take the floor after me. So thank you so much, and back to you, Nadia.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And we hope that with the new commitment, we can progress even better and more. Thanks a lot. So our next speaker is His Excellency, Mr. Ramesh Rajisingman. He is currently the Director of the Coordinator Division of the OCHI in Geneva. Before that, he was for 2 years the Acting Assistant Secretary General of Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator at the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. His career is the field of humanitarian affairs, and with the United Nations system spans over more than 25 years and included assignments in headquarters as well as in many crisis settings with OCHA and UNICEF. So with all your experience, can you please explain why this Global Disability Summit is important for promoting the rights of persons with disability affected by these emergencies? And what's the current state of humanitarian emergency globally, please?
Well, thank you very much, Nadia, and also thank you very much, Tina, for that. Greetings to all our colleagues on this line as well. As you mentioned in your introduction, Nadia, the Global Disability Summit is a good way to remind us that at least 41 million persons with disabilities will require humanitarian assistance in 2022. This represents 15% of the overall number of persons in need, in line with global estimates, which is an extraordinarily high number. However, as we well know, the real figure tends to be much higher in situations of armed conflict, disasters, forced displacement, or in a global pandemic such as the COVID-19, which we've just faced, where persons with disabilities are often forgotten, marginalized, discriminated, or subjected to abuse and violence. And as just highlighted by Ambassador Schmidt, the first Global Disability Summit was an important watershed moment to address some of the challenges experienced by persons with disabilities in many parts of the world. It also contributed to reignite the momentum created 5 years ago by the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul. Both these events called on us to move away from the one-size-fits-all approach to humanitarian action. They also reminded us that we cannot just focus on people's vulnerabilities. Affected people have the right to make their own decisions, to be treated equally, and not to be discriminated against. The 2030 Agenda's commitment to leave no one behind and to reach the furthest behind first is grounded in these human rights principles. Inclusion is now increasingly being considered as in humanitarian policy and programming. For example, in line with OCHA's commitments at the 2018 Global Disabilities Summit, we now consider that inclusion must start at the level of needs assessments. We have worked towards ensuring that humanitarian needs assessments, the response analysis that follows it, and response plans focus on the priorities identified by the affected people themselves and considers diversities and existing new vulnerabilities. So we are working also towards strengthening access of persons with disabilities to pool fund mechanisms that we have in most country operations. And in fact, today there is no other way to go rather down this path. But much more needs to be done. Together with colleagues of the reference group on the inclusion of persons with disabilities, we have launched a call for action to foster further commitments and concrete actions to promote the rights of persons with disabilities. Today, we find ourselves in a situation where the volume, cost, and length of humanitarian assistance has grown by 250% in just 7 years. And we expect that in this year, 2022, worldwide, one person in 29 will require humanitarian assistance. In 2020, it was one person out of 47. In other words, 3% of the world population are now in need of humanitarian assistance. To give you some sense of the scale of this challenge, if everyone requiring emergency aid lived in one country, it would be the 4th most populous country in the world. This increase, which will continue, is driven by confluence of political instability, increased displacement levels, climate impacts, and the effects of COVID-19. We experienced the highest number of violent conflicts since 1945. The spike in humanitarian needs is also being driven by natural disasters, such as the earthquake in Haiti and hurricanes Eta and Iota in Central America. And Afghanistan is amongst the countries in which needs are skyrocketing, as you will have seen from the last few months. The worst drought in 27 years and the cumulative effects of more than 4 decades of conflict are severely affecting food security. Even after harvest, 57% of households do not have sufficient food reserves for the next 3 months. And we estimate that we will need almost $4.5 billion for Afghanistan, the world's largest ever humanitarian appeal and response fund. Ambassador Marge Smith mentioned the need for a continuum between humanitarian and development actions, and we share this view entirely. Indeed, we know that displacement lasts 20 years on average for refugees, and more than 10 years for most internally displaced persons. Better connectivity between humanitarian and development efforts has therefore become a must. Another important aspect to consider is the intersecting nature of vulnerabilities. For example, women with disabilities are 4 to 10 times more likely to be exposed to sexual violence than women without disabilities. So let us all join forces and make sure that this summit will continue to foster our work to ensure that the rights of persons with disabilities affected by humanitarian emergencies are protected and sustained. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you very much for this very clear data and facts. Well, really shocking in fact, and we hope really that with the summit we can progress together and work on it to leave really no one behind. So our next speaker is Her Excellency Mr. Benefsha Yacobi. She is a civic society and human rights activist, founder of the organization of Rehab for Rehabilitation Services for the Blind in Afghanistan since 2008, and Authority in the Afghanistan's Authority General Office from 2017 until 2019, and also Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commissioner. She was born in Kabul, Afghanistan. During her activities, both in the government and in the civic society, her main goal has been to advocate for the rights of the vulnerable categories of the society, including women, children, and persons with disability. She has a two master's degree, one in political science and another in international relations. And now she's still going on and doing her PhD, and she's in her second year at the Indian University. So welcome between us, Benefsha. So from your experience, when reflecting on the complexity of humanitarian emergencies today, as we just hear about the facts, and especially on the situation in Afghanistan, how are the rights of persons with disability being impacted? And what is the role of international actors in promoting the rights of persons with disabilities affected by humanitarian emergencies? Taking Afghanistan as an example, please.
Hello, everybody. Many thanks for inviting me in this session. I'm very happy and it's my delighted to now in this tough day and in this tough situation, full of crisis condition, I'm voice of lots of people who don't have any voice in all over the world. Thanks for this event and thanks for giving this opportunity to me. And the first one I want to say, I'm grateful from US Council and from Ms. Isabel for leading the advocacy for persons with disability in these days and for their fundamental rights. So I want to start speaking with you in this point. As you all know, and I'm sure you all agree with me, Afghan persons with disability have these rights to be protected. Their rights must be protected from all international society side. So, you know, in this period of the crisis and when crisis, we have lots of evacuation program for lots of people, for journalists, for civil society activists, for women rights activists, human rights activists, lots of people who were under dangers and under threats. But unfortunately, in this process, persons with disability are left behind. And if we want to count some people with disability who were evacuated, although it was very difficult, we cannot, if you are counted, they are not more than our fingers. So this is the big issue for all people with disability, for those who are under threat. And some of our people with disability, if they are evacuated, they are in second countries like Pakistan or some other countries that they don't have good facility for their life and they don't have the facility for kind of resettlement, because these kind of countries like Pakistan, Iran, and these countries, they cannot accept immigrant and people like that. So I think we must think about think about this issue and about this condition. How can we help them? And that times we had a little bit a good condition and situation for advocacy. We were advocated and we were said, okay, people with disability are capable. They can work for civil society. They can work for attorney. They can work for government. They can work for here, there, and some of them were employed from that government. But nowadays they all left behind, and some of them are under threat and dangerous. So this is one people. So after the Taliban take over our country, so what will happen to us? Organizations who work for people with disability, most of them was stopped, and the delivery services, the advocacy services, the raising awareness services were stopped, and we don't have anything there. So some of the local NGOs and most of the local NGOs and organizations are close to be removed even from the firm of that country, because they cannot continue their advocacy and their activity, because there is lots of problem. Even they cannot have their registration kind of certificate or something like that from that government. So as I told you, all categories of a person with disability are suffer from this bad condition, especially women with disability, children with disability, and persons who has intellectual disability, mentally disability. They are very vulnerable among these all categories of persons with disability. And the other problem is that there is no coordination among government and among kind of disability civil society activists. And there is no mechanism for that. So the system was collapsed. The other big issue and big problem is that on that time, at least there was some organizations, some governmental and non-governmental places that person with disability have, if they have kind of complaints and kind of problems, they could come to them, like Afghanistan Human Rights Commission, like the Ministry of Martyr and Disabled. So now these places are not there. So when the people with disability have kind of complaints, where can they go? So what can they do there? There is very big issue for that people who are with a big issue and problems. Most of the organizations and most of the capacity that we have in these 20 years, they are collapsed. So most of persons with disability are jobless. They don't have. So we lost many things. We lost most of the things. And then there is no place, there is no mechanism to monitor people with disability rights. It's a big difficult. So what can be done? International society should have a kind of inclusive mechanism and inclusive program for those people who are under threat and they are left behind in Afghanistan. For short and long time, I think UN, governments, international societies, and the donor must have kind of plans, kind of mentioning to person with disability. All of the plans must be inclusive for all people with disability. And especially in the emergency response, they must be very careful that they must have kind of plan. It would be inclusive for all persons with disability in case of starting help, and in case of policies, commitments, action plans, and everything must be inclusive for all people with disability. And then when they want to have kind of program, the person with disability or the representative should participate in these programs, because we all think nothing about us without us. So there must be people with disability, and they must be aware of what's going on. And when we want to do monitoring and when we want to evaluate the situation, we must think this evaluation and this monitoring program must be inclusive for all people with disability. Because of this, we can understand what's going on there. Many thanks for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Benefsha, for sharing with us the terrible situation where the person with disabilities are still living in Afghanistan, and even being evacuated, there is no guarantee that they have the right support to live in dignity in the neighbor countries. I'm sure that we will come back to this during the question and answer session. So our next speaker, I'm really pleased to introduce her, is Her Excellency, Ms. Abi Akram, a chair of the Asian Pacific Women with Disability Network. She's also the co-coordinator of the Asian Pacific Women with Disabilities Unit and coordinator South Asian Disability and Development Initiatives Project. And with the personal experience of physical disability, Abi Akram has been engaged in the activities of disability movement since 1997, and one of the most active women with disability leaders globally. Welcome, Abia. So we know that the experience of persons with disabilities varies depending on their age, gender, and other factors. Using the situation of women with disability in Afghanistan as an example, what can governments, UN entities, NGOs, and civil societies do together to promote the rights of persons with disability in emergency in a way that it really reflects an intersectional approach? Abia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Nadia Haddad, and all the speakers. It was really timely and very important session today, because in the Global Summit, we know from 2018, the commitments the state and other representatives have taken, that's really bringing the change. And after the COVID response, the situation get really worse, and many people are facing all that discrimination. And this is the time where we can take our commitment forward and see what kind of change together we can take. We have 10 to 15% of the total population are persons with disability. 50% of them are women and girls with disability, and more than 80% are in the developing countries. And we have seen and witnessed during the humanitarian responses and the conflict situation, those women with disabilities are facing all the gender-based violence, sexual harassment, and even they are not getting the basic services. The service providers and all the infrastructures are not that much inclusive. We were part of the all the response during the earthquake in 2005 in Pakistan, then in Nepal, the flood response, and the people who were having persons with disabilities, they just left and carry the expensive things with them, because we thought that will be helpful, but not persons with disability. And the people who came to protect them, they are the ones who are doing all the sexual harassment and the gender-based violence. So in that way, it was so challenging for those women with disabilities to survive. And we talk about intersectionality. It's very important because it's a young widow, and then having economically poor, and all these conditions are creating double or triple or four time discrimination for them. We what we tried to do during the COVID response also, in the Afghanistan situation currently, Madam Shah have rightly mentioned, the situation is really worse. I know she is personally experiencing there, and we were also in contact with the disabled people organizations in Afghanistan, and especially women with disabilities are reaching out to us to provide them a little information in the accessible format that's not available. How we can bring their voices in the whole process. What kind of services we are providing to them. The cluster systems, the mechanisms, even the protection clusters, if they establish, the women with disabilities or the disabled people organizations are not getting the space to talk about their challenges. We have seen the government and the other structure, if they want to evacuate, they are not getting those services. And even we are experiencing if they come to Pakistan, how they can get registered as a refugee, what kind of shelters which are inclusive or accessible for them we are providing them, what kind of long-term sustainable plans for them, because if they are not earning or getting the employment opportunities, how they are going to survive or support their family members. Many of the women with disabilities in Afghanistan have said, we lost our jobs because we have to wear the hijab to go out. And if we wear the hijab, even when we go, everyone recognizes that the same person because of the wheelchair or because of our disability. So we are really restricted to go out, and it's so difficult for them to survive in that situation. We are trying to connect them, again, if we talk about the children with disability, the education is the biggest challenge for them. We work with UNICEF, with other stakeholders in Pakistan to provide them those kind of inclusive education services, but it's hard to identify as a person with disability, and then again, like they are stigma is attached, stereotype is attached, because in our countries we don't want to mention or accept the disabilities, so we just call them, they are very close to God, so we have to respect them or ask them to pray for us. So that kind of culture is still existing, and the charity based approach is also there. So how we can make sure the UN systems have the, like we established during the earthquake, the aging and disability task force, through that task force we're bringing the disabled people organizations on the table, so they were discussing what are the challenges they are facing. And then secondly, we have the Sendai framework, we have all the like eyesight guidelines. So how we can make them more inclusive, so everyone have the interlinkages and the proper plans for the implementation. This summit have a like strong stance because the government is taking the commitments. So how they are linking it with the international commitments and to the local, from the regional to the local. And Afghanistan support is really much needed at the moment, and we really need to think how the DPOs are existing in Afghanistan, based in Afghanistan. We can support them, not starting from the scratch, but at least provide them the real support which can sustain their plans, their work, and their experiences there. And we can provide that whole mechanism where we can collaboratively work with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for highlighting once again that it's really important that through the recommendation you gave, that we really call for action to include persons with disability on all levels, and that we claim meaningful participation from the beginning of the process to really leave no one behind. Thank you very much. So our next speaker now is His Excellency, Mr. Samuel Haq Sami. He's a disability right and inclusion advisor, humanity and inclusion, and member of the Disability Inclusion Working Group in Afghanistan. Sami has worked for Handicap International since the 1st May of 2008, promoting the right of persons with disability and supporting humanitarian and development actors to strengthen disability inclusion. Sami has engaged in multiple inclusive governance and response programs, and is now engaged in recent work of Handicap International or Humanity International to promote disability inclusive, coordinated, and inclusive livelihood programs in Kunduz, Kandahar, Herat, Nimruz, and other areas. So, Sami, we heard earlier that there has been much progress made globally since 2018. We have also heard that at country level, much still remains to be done. From the perspective of humanitarian actors in Afghanistan, what are the key actions that we still need to take to protect the rights of persons with disability affected by emergencies?
Thank you, Nadia, and greetings all participants. And thank you all the previous speakers. They had very comprehensive remarks. The overall situation in Afghanistan has changed significantly due to the rapid political concern, political and economical changes that have occurred since August. In such a rapidly changed environment, it is essential to understand, particularly as a humanitarian actor working with people with disability, and respond to the unique needs and risk of individuals with disability, even more throughout the response. Although robust data is missing, we see a significant impact on persons with disability in their representative organizations in all locations. The following are some of the most urgent needs and barriers that we as HI Afghanistan have identified as challenges for the protection of the rights of persons with disability in the country. First, regarding the network of persons with disability throughout the country, we see that OPDs, Organization of Persons with Disability, and other representative organizations face challenges similar yet different than some NGOs. For example, having to stop activities and having their offices occupied by IEA forces after August. On one hand, they have stopped activities, were forced to leave offices, and often unaware of the support and reporting mechanism they can get from the humanitarian access group, INSO, Akbar, etc. Additionally, some OPDs have been shut down or reduced activities because there was a lack of understanding of OPD's mandate and work by the new authority in the addition to the networks. Fear for negative responses to organizing advocacy events, gathering. Many of these fears remain for those in Afghanistan, and lack of operations and increased by security concerns and lack of funding opportunities. We expect more or further delays in achieving rights of persons with disabilities. As the former ministry progress made towards an inclusive policy has been put on hold. Secondly, we see that the economic crisis has resulted in a significant decrease in livelihood opportunities for persons with disabilities since August. In addition, the further collapse of the health system makes pre-existing vulnerabilities worse and makes access barriers larger, leading to more humanitarian health needs and impact on people with disability and their families. In terms of access to humanitarian services, we see that oral, physical, institutional, communication, and attitudinal barriers have increased for persons with disabilities, especially those who are displaced, leading to lack of access to infrastructure, humanitarian information, multiple concerns around safety, and further ignorance of rights, including access to rehabilitation care and other specific services. In terms of humanitarian coordination, there is a strong need for more coordinated effort at a national level in order to facilitate genuinely inclusive humanitarian action in Afghanistan. Before the events of August, considerable progress has been made by actors in the country, and these actions need to be reprioritized and resources in the midst of this ongoing crisis, as both national and international NGOs with a growing interest on disability inclusion still lack the resources and know how to fully implement inclusive humanitarian action and step behind the easy solutions. Orally, throughout the targeted data collection is needed to support these, but such data collection also requires additional significant resources. In a summary, our quick recommendation are to strengthen the role of OPDs that have been shrinking due to limited resources and political situation is clear for humanitarian and mechanism for engagement and long-term support are available. In the current context, there is a huge need for other organizations to engage more directly with people with disabilities and support them to report on their issues and solutions. This needs to be paired with the increased advocacy. The humanitarian community should moreover pick up again on initiatives to promote meaningful participation and better mobilization of persons with disabilities in different areas by strengthening monitoring of rights and barriers and supporting safe environments for OPDs to organize, for example, advocacy events, gathering, and resume their activities. We also believe more space for humanitarian actors to build their capacity on inclusive humanitarian actions and upscale services, and particularly for the humanitarian actors using cash modalities, providing emergency livelihood and protection programming in addition to health services delivery. We expect that the 2019 IASC guidelines will be of the big help to support leadership around disability inclusive humanitarian action in Afghanistan and support humanitarian actors in building their capacity on disability inclusion. We foresee several training yet estimate for is needed to cover the technical gaps for humanitarian actors and age and disability inclusion, including on inclusive protection and disability data collection. At the same time, longer-term engagement should be sought to build on networks of persons with disabilities and allow more partnership with the current and future landscape. Thank you very much for your time and attention to these vital concerns and key priorities. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sami, for highlighting once again how we could protect the rights of persons with disabilities. So I will quickly go to our last speaker. We heard the calls and the emergency, the urgency also to interact from the local and from the bottom up. So now we'll come back to the global level with our next speaker, His Excellency, Ms. William Shimmerly. He's the Global Protector Cluster Coordinator based in Geneva. William has over more than 20 years of experience in working to protect and promote the human rights of crisis-affected population in diverse contexts around the world. Previously to this role with the GPC, William has worked within many large humanitarian responses, including Afghanistan, Lebanon, Uganda, and Syria. And now he leads the GPC and their support to the 32 national and subnational protection field cluster. So, William, based on what we've heard today about the action needed to protect the rights of persons with disabilities in humanitarian emergencies, how can this Global Disability Summit drive changes in the humanitarian system? And can you touch briefly on the role of governments and development actors in promoting these rights in emergency situations? The floor is yours, William.
Nada, thank you so much. And thanks to all the speakers. It's a bit of a privilege to be the last speaker because one can build on all the input. So thanks, Ambassador, for this historic push of where we were and where we come from and pushing us to where we should go to. And Ramesh for the big picture that puts these shocking figures as it was commented. Abia, thank you for explaining really well this double, triple, 4 times discrimination that you mentioned, and Sami, your overview is comprehensive. So at this stage, what I would like to offer is a bit of a complementary angle to what was said. And we have teams in about 33 operations in conflict zones and natural disasters. And the biggest protection problem that is reported by our group on the ground is invisibility. Millions of people go through the pain of being targeted, stigmatized, ignored in total solitude, wondering if anyone knows or cares, wondering if they matter at all. And this invisibility is beyond feelings. It is the escape route of criminals and men with guns in most cases. It's invisibility from one's family, community, political solutions. It's invisibility from justice when justice times come. But it's also invisibility from a humanitarian. And this is what I would like to focus on today. When we humanitarians don't try to see and work with those who are made most invisible, we fail. We fail to do our job. We also contribute to this invisibility. So while one way of looking at the discussion today is how to mitigate specific protection risks and addressing the needs of persons with disability, the way we prefer to look at it is we see disability as a result of a negative interaction between a person and an environment that poses barriers. And our humanitarian system is part of the environment. So the discussion today is about humanitarian action. Are we doing our job? We've focused, rightly so, on Afghanistan, where I've worked in coordinating the cluster over the last couple of months. And in Afghanistan, like in many other places, for instance, Central African Republic, when I was last week, women and girls with disability, particularly those with intellectual disabilities, are significantly more likely to experience sexual and gender-based violence than those without the physical disability. In places like Yemen, like in Afghanistan, children with disability are at a greater risk of abuse. It's factual, and the figures are quite telling. They're at a greater risk of abuse and neglect, and of being victims of discrimination and violence when compared to the average. In Iraq and Somalia, we see a growing trend, like in the Sahel, of targeted coercion, trafficking really, a targeted coercion for persons with disability by extremist groups for participation in front lines and suicide bombing. In places like Tonga, Madagascar, and Ramesh reflected on natural disasters, often unable to rapidly move away from areas impacted by the disasters in search for safety. Persons with disability are at an increased risk of being left behind in such situations. So for us, the discussion today is how do we do our job well in such an environment? I think three ways are worth highlighting. First, we do have to live up to our responsibility of not being an obstacle to inclusion and participation. And this starts by a lot of what was presented today. Get the story right, get our data and the nuanced story of persons with disability right. We have to ensure, of course, that all the services are accessible, but also we have to look at it in a broader way. Sometimes lack of documentation blocks access to services, and we ignore that, but most persons with disability in a place like Afghanistan do not have the tazkira. So they don't have access to humanitarian services because of something one step removed. And this is where the collaboration with development actors to look at the fundamental and foundational rights could be life-saving and quite important. We must also make sure that our basic systems as a humanitarians, like feedback mechanisms and accountability to affected population, are quite well tailored. And we have heard quite significant examples about the language we use and the modalities we use to reach out to people we want to work with. So first, don't be an obstacle. Second, we have to contribute to removing barriers imposed by the wider environment. So classical work such as disarmament and mine action are quite important to be put in this category because they reduce the risk of physical disability. Looking at broader justice system and legal perspective and community-based justice mechanisms need to be supported. And this is where the development angle becomes quite strong, but also the peace dimension. This nexus is not only development or humanitarian, it has also a strong peace dimension and needs not to be ignored in this context. And the third, we need still, we have to not be an obstacle and we need to remove obstacles, but still we need targeted interventions. And here we must enable the work of comprehensive programs, and the comprehensiveness is in time and quality, and that affects financing, but it affects also the type of collaboration we establish with local organizations working on disability. We have, of course, to work on functional rehabilitation, but also on leadership matters, on inclusive livelihoods. We heard Abia talking about that. It's important that we look at the capacity building in a broader sense for a humanitarian action and make sure that persons with disability are at the center of it. Now, I would like to close a bit on a personal note. When I was just finishing my university, I was doing economics. I was drawn to human rights and humanitarian work by an outstanding person in my home country called Ghazi Aad. I'm Lebanese. So Ghazi is a mountain of effort in leading civil society work on forced disappearances related issues. Forced disappearances resulting from the Lebanese civil war. He was my leader for many years. He's a source of inspiration for many. He has toured the world and the Middle East, speaking in an unparalleled courage, truth to power, to dictatorships, to war roles. And he single-handedly managed to release disappeared people from secret jails and established a law and a DNA bank for disappeared people. As he was on a wheelchair for all his adult life. And he often said, when he was asked why he's doing this dangerous job, he said that in the aftermath of civil wars and conflicts, most of the community becomes invisible. And the only way to get to true peace is to ensure that all those who are disappeared appear and sit on the table of solution and the future. And then he would smile and say, some disappear in secret jails. And then he would look at himself and say, some disappear in plain sight. So from Ghazi to centrality of protection, people, as all the speakers said, should be at the center of the table. And that is very true for local organizations. The participation of persons with disabilities and their representative organizations is therefore key, a key element that should vertebrate all our commitments. And I think if we take nothing from this summit is to impose a clear presence in all humanitarian fora of persons with disability and their representatives. The ripple effect of that feasible single move would be massive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William, to highlight again that nobody should stay invisible. So in order to progress a little bit, the floor is open now for questions and answers. We had a first question from Hayat Wahdat on how persons with disability can be better engaged as actor in the response. You could maybe ask to give some, in a very few words, while you are thinking about an answer to all the panelists. I will give also the floor now to a young lady. I will just go and see. She is Aisha Quran. She asked the floor to give a view of young people. Aisha, if you can just in very short, briefly, in 2 minutes, share with us your testimony. The floor is yours, Aisha.
Nadia, perhaps we can open up to the panelists to respond to the questions, and then we can figure out the technical details around bringing in Aisha. Thanks.
Okay, so I will add maybe a second question that we had from Hussein Ahmad on how can international organization best support local and national organization in Afghanistan, especially OPDs, who are currently facing multiple challenges. So the woof of the panelists is ready already to give a brief answer to this. Go ahead. Maybe the ambassador, can you maybe give a short? Yes. Ambassador, if you have a short answer to one of the questions. Yes.
Can you hear me? I had a problem with my microphone.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
now I hear you.
No, I just said that I've been listening with great interest and also taken notes on trying to think on what this implies for us, maybe as well as a country, but as a nation that works closely with international organizations in the field. And I think that it comes down to the question of making sure of the visibility. It has been mentioned that it tends to disappear in a crisis situation. You forget to focus on the vulnerable groups, and they leave no one behind. It's very clear in our commitments, but at the same time we're obviously not doing enough. So I'm taking note of both the advice and the description that I've heard from the field, and especially in the Afghanistan situation where this is so obvious that we need to pay attention. So I'm bringing this back and to make sure that we clarify our expectations of the international organizations who works in the crisis situations. That would be my main point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Sammy, you had your hand up. Maybe one reaction on your side.
Yes, thank you again for giving opportunities. How to have a strong collaboration between international organization and also national NGOs. We have one of the good forum that establish disability inclusive working group. Some of the NGOs part of that, but it needs to be strengthened. And we need to increase the membership of OPDs and national NGOs in this group. Through this forum, all the humanitarian actors are sharing opportunities and sharing their capacities and resources, and coming and to discussing the challenges, the needs of persons with disability every month. There was some gap, there was a little delay after this August, but it's existed. It has many members, UN, international NGOs, national NGOs, all actors, especially humanitarian actors, most of them part of this group, they are the member. I also would recommend national NGOs to be part of that. And we also tried to introduce and to encourage OPDs to be part of that. It's happened, but we need to do more on this area. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe Benefsha, can you give us from your experience from the ground how we can really make the voice heard of those who are really unheard?
Hello again. Can you hear me?
Yes, Benefsha, thank you.
Okay. In my experience, as you all know, unfortunately, in these some months, most of the things has gone. Most of the efforts that we did before has gone. For example, we have a committee in the name of advocacy committee for, it was among some of the at least 20 organizations who work for persons with disability, and national and international NGOs were included in this committee. So we always had kind of meetings, monthly meetings together, and Mrs. Sami was there with us, and we all were together, we worked together. But nowadays, because the problem is that in Afghanistan, we don't have this kind of space to even work together. But the thing that I can kind of functionally suggest is that maybe the founders, the kind of people who donate, even the National Society will fund them, they can have kind of plan and kind of policy for all international organizations who works inside Afghanistan, and specifically in case of person with disability, they can give them kind of in their policy, they can include, they must be with national NGOs and they must work with them. Through this way, we make strengths national organization or local organizations for persons with disability there.
Okay, thank you. Abia, do you want to add something?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think this is really important question. I've been like working quite long with Mr. Ahmadi, and we are trying and figuring out like what kind of support we can provide. And still, it's kind of like mechanism that should be exist, not like created when the time of the emergency or any, God forbid, that situation come. We have to create that interlinkages between the disaster and the humanitarian response, because this is really important, like how we are seeing our policies and strategies on that way. Secondly, in terms of the organizations who are working, so they have to have the understanding, as Mr. Ambassador rightly mentioned, like we need to create the word disability into our policies, into our plans and the strategies. Once they are highlighted, then it will be easier for them to create the indicators, like whenever there is that kind of situation, they are providing that support. Thirdly, we need a long-term plans, not only one-time support to the organization, because sometimes they get the funding, but again, that persons with disabilities are not like able to sustain their lives, and it's all about their dignity, their respect, and dignified life. So how we can provide that kind of long-term support with the financial, with the budgetary allocations as well, because they need to get the protection as well, their assisted devices as well, and livelihood for them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Maybe shortly, William, to close again, what would you advise?
Thanks. So I think there are a number of very straightforward elements, which is there are, for humanitarian response and development responses, there are structures, and we have to make it mandatory, the representation. I mean, we just have to do it. It doesn't take much more than just deciding to do it. Now, that's on the participation, and I think on the participation, that has a lot of positive impacts in general that we can't account for from the beginning and won't be similar from operation to operation. On the second part is, I think, this in the humanitarian lingo, this concept of humanitarian development nexus or a humanitarian preparedness, all these are investable in before the heat is up in a location. Our humanitarian crises are roughly within the same 20 operations over the last 30 years. So it's pretty clear where we can invest and use both development and humanitarian resources to support existing structures in the way that they need. That doesn't come without challenges. Speaking about disability organization as one block is, of course, like speaking about UN agencies as one block or international NGOs as one block is not true. So there are realities that has to be addressed. But I think the investment geographic target of where we should invest in supporting existing structures is self-made by the crises themselves, and we can, on no regret basis, invest in these areas. That's it.
Thank you very much, William. So we give now the floor to Aisha, because the technical issue is resolved. Aisha, the floor is yours. If you can briefly make your intervention, please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you for today's event and for the comprehensive discussion on the rights of people with disabilities, especially in Afghanistan. But I would like to shed light on a very important missing piece in this whole discussion today. Imagine being a young woman with disability watching today's event from Afghanistan, living in a war zone that raised a whole generation of young people with disabilities. As so many young lives have been destroyed due to the airstrikes and suicide bombing attacks in my country over the 4 decades long war. yet wondering where exactly you fit in the whole global disability rights movement when you have always remained an audience, a subject, and above all, a victim. My name is Aisha Khurram. I'm the former Afghan youth representative to the United Nations, and I have decided to support and volunteer for the Global Network of Youth with Disabilities in 2020 when it was newly established. And I must confess that as a young peace builder from Afghanistan who advocated for the rights and inclusion of youth with disabilities, it's a shame to witness that there is no single voice from a young person in this event today. Intersectionality is neither a myth nor an abstract concept. We have to realize that for a young disabled woman from a conflict zone, her whole life is shaped and impacted by the intersectionality of identities. What they're going through and what they're experiencing and what they're expecting cannot be expressed by anyone except for them. And we have to stop treating young people as passive beneficiaries of agendas. They have so much potential to offer. They have so much to contribute. They're only disabled when you victimize them and decide to speak about them, not with them. And when you decide to open some space, don't just consult with them. Acknowledge their right for self-determination and self-actualization. Acknowledge the need for having them on board as active partners and agenda contributors. There is right now an urgent and serious need for action by adult stakeholders to develop an intergenerational leadership strategy in coordination with the disabled youth in Afghanistan to ensure that nothing about youth is decided without youth, and to ensure that the decisions will not only acknowledge the need for inclusivity, but realize the promises being made by opening space for youth who have been desperately waiting in margin just to have a say in their own future. How young people at this moment in time in Afghanistan are supported to transit through the current humanitarian crisis across gender, across ethnicity, disability, and educational background will have a lasting impact not only on the disaster recovery process, but also on the future of humanity. And today I would like to ask the panel here how exactly right now with the health and disability rights institution being completely down, what is the alternative that young people with disabilities can rely on? And what are your plans for meaningfully including youth with disabilities in Afghanistan and the solutions and commitments that you're offering at the Global Disability Summit? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Aisha, for highlighting this working point for all of us. We will definitely take it to us. But sadly enough, due to lack of time, because we need to discuss the next steps, we will come back to you on written. We will ask all the panelists to answer your question and the other question that we have also still in the question and answer area, and also the remarks in the chat. So don't hesitate to put all your thoughts or your question in it. We will definitely come back to you. Just leave your email address and the organizers will come back to you. But now we are really obliged to go to the next step. I will give now the floor to Kristen Lange. She's the program specialist, Disability Inclusive Humanitarian Action within UNICEF, and she's the co-chair of the Disability Reference Group who's organizing this. Kristen, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Nadia, and thank you to all the panelists. I'll be very, very brief on the next steps. I think today's discussion has highlighted a number of very, very important actions that we can all take forward collectively as UN entities, as NGOs, as organisations of persons with disabilities. Today's event was organised by the Disability Reference Group, which does exactly that, which brings together organisations of persons with disabilities, UN entities and NGOs. Within the Disability Reference Group, we have a working group for the Global Disabilities Summit. And what we will be doing is, following this event, we'll be reconvening and we'll be having some discussions on all the different actions that came up during this event, on the various humanitarian related commitments that have been made at the summit, and to talk about how we collectively can work together to promote action towards realising those commitments. So I've pasted into the chat box a link to the reference group website, as well as a link for signing up to the reference group. We very much welcome new members and we would love to have you joining us to to see how we can work together to further build on the progress that we've seen since 2018 and to have the commitments that are made at this year's GDS realised in practice. So thank you again to everybody, and I will hand back to you, Nadia, for the close.
Okay, thank you very much to all of you, to all the participants, to all the panelists for your great interactions. This is the start of a new journey, so we will not stop here. We will definitely be a kind of watchdog. After all the commitments that we hear, then we will engage ourselves and we will take our responsibility from individual level into the global level. And we hope that within the next Disability Global Summit, we will be proud that we achieved at least some changes from and that we have some impact on the quality of life of every person within a humanitarian crisis, that we really make changes for them. So we work on that. So I would also like to thank all of you, and I would like to thank the sign language interpretation and the captioning services for the great work they have done. And so let's join forces and maybe go to the official session now and to see how we can also over there commit ourselves to make a real change. Thank you very much, and you all merit a big applause. Thank you to all of you. Thanks again, and we keep on track. Thanks. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.